There is a moment that does not arrive with noise. It does not come with applause or lightning. It comes softly, quietly, and yet it marks the true beginning. You feel it before you understand it. A shift, a stillness, a strange clarity that moves beneath the surface of your life. You wake up, and something inside you can no longer pretend. You are not lost, you are not late, you are remembering. All your life there has been a weight you could not name, a longing that did not match your surroundings. You tried to fit in, but something sacred pulled you away. You followed the rules, but they never brought peace. You walked paths others praised, but they left you empty. And still you carried on. Faithful, silent, waiting. Because somewhere deep within you knew. You knew your life would not follow the pattern of the crowd. You knew your timing would be strange. You watched others rise early while you remained hidden. You gave everything and the doors stayed shut. You poured your heart out and silence answered. But even in the silence, something holy was working. You were not being punished, you were being prepared, molded in secret, refined in waiting, not overlooked, protected. Chosen ones do not bloom early, they are planted deep. And when they rise, it is not by accident, it is by design. You have reached the turning, the veil is lifting, the ache is speaking. The questions you once buried are now becoming revelation. Because the truth is, your real life does not begin at 20 or 30, or when the world expected it. Your real life begins when God says now. And for many that moment is here, at 40. This is where we begin. At 40, you've been broken enough to hear God clearly. There's a silence that only comes after the storm. A hush that settles deep in the soul after years of noise, striving, and unanswered prayers. It is not the silence of emptiness, but of readiness. And by the time you reach 40, you have known enough breaking to finally become still enough to hear. Not the loud voice of the world, not the echoes of expectation, but the whisper of God, the whisper that was always there but drowned beneath the clamor of trying to survive. In your youth, you prayed with urgency. You asked God for signs, for rescue, for favor, but His answers came slow, or so it seemed. What you didn't know then is that He was not ignoring you. He was forming you. The breaking was not the absence of love. It was its deepest expression. Because chosen ones must be hollowed before they can be filled. Like clay that resists the shaping hand, you had to be softened through loss, through disappointment, through the aching weight of delay. You asked why. Heaven replied with silence. Not to punish, but to prepare. It is in the wilderness that prophets are born. It is in the cave that David learned to sing. It is in the ashes that Job declared, "I had heard of you with my ears, but now my eyes have seen you." This is the spiritual architecture of the chosen. Pain clears the chamber. Loss removes the idols. Loneliness invites the presence. And at 40, you look back and realize that what felt like abandonment was actually alignment. God was not far, He was just quiet, because He wanted you to hear something deeper than words. And now, your ears are tuned to a higher frequency. You no longer chase noise. You wait for instruction. You do not run ahead, you walk with Him. And when He speaks now, you know. It is not just guidance, it is intimacy. It is not just calling, it is communion. The voice that once seemed distant is now the only voice that matters. And that voice is leading you into the next revelation. You no longer fear being misunderstood. There was a time when being misunderstood felt like death, when silence from others felt like rejection and disapproval felt like exile. You tried to explain yourself, to soften your truth, to make your light less blinding to those still walking in shadows. But no matter how gently you spoke, they could not hear you. And no matter how deeply you felt, they could not receive you. You were too much, or too different, or too soon. But now, something has changed. At 40, the ache to be understood begins to fall away. You no longer beg to be seen because you have learned to see yourself. You no longer fear rejection because you have lived through it. You have tasted the loneliness of being misunderstood and found it was not poison, it was preparation. You no longer need to be explained. You need only to be aligned. You see now what you could not before. That misunderstanding is often the seal of chosenness. Jeremiah was called to uproot and to tear down, to build and to plant, but the people did not listen. Not because he failed, but because his words were not for everyone. Jesus himself said the world cannot accept what it cannot recognize. So why did you think they would recognize you? There is peace now in the dissonance. You no longer shrink to fit what others can digest. You no longer water down your fire. You carry your calling with reverence, not explanation. Because sacred things are rarely understood by common minds, you no longer chase clarity from the crowd. You follow the cloud. And when the cloud moves, you move with it, even if no one walks beside you. The hunger to be understood has been replaced by the hunger to be faithful. And that hunger leads you into the next threshold of power. You've learned the spiritual power of no. There is a sacred shift that happens when you stop saying yes out of fear of disappointing others, fear of being left behind, fear of being seen as selfish. But when you reach 40, that fear loses its grip. You begin to understand that every yes you gave to the wrong thing was a no to your calling. Every compromise was a delay. Every forced agreement was a fracture in your peace. And finally, you stop. You no longer apologize for guarding your energy. You no longer explain your absence from places that once drained you. You begin to say no with authority, not aggression. Because you have come to know that no is not rejection. It is protection. And not just for you, but for the sacred space God is building in you. A space not everyone deserves to enter. Jesus said no to the crowd that wanted to make him king. He said no to his own brothers when the timing was wrong. He said no to Satan in the wilderness, refusing shortcuts to power. If he had to say no to walk in alignment, how much more must we? The spiritual power of no is this. It realigns your life around truth. It reveals who respects your boundaries and who only respected your compliance. It filters your circle. It restores your time. And most of all, it makes room for the yes that matters. You no longer carry guilt for choosing your peace. You no longer confuse obedience with exhaustion. And when you speak no now, it echoes with the voice of one who has been silenced too long. Your no has become holy. A gate, a sword, a declaration that you are not available for anything that dishonors who God has called you to be. And in that bold refusal, the path to vision opens. The vision has finally crystallized. There is a moment when the fog begins to lift. Not all at once, but slowly, reverently, as if heaven itself is unveiling something long hidden. At 40, that moment arrives. You begin to see, not just with your eyes, but with your spirit. The dreams that once haunted you now begin to make sense. The delays that once tormented you now reveal their design. What once felt random now feels orchestrated. You no longer chase every open door. You no longer grasp at fleeting opportunities. Because now you know what aligns. You know what is yours and what is not. The noise of the world fades and the frequency of heaven becomes clear. You no longer ask, "What should I do with my life?" You ask instead, "How can I carry what I have been given with faithfulness?" This is the moment when the fragments begin to form a picture. The years of confusion, the seasons of wandering, the missteps and detours, they all fit now, like pieces of a puzzle that only make sense from above. And in that clarity, there is peace. Because you know the assignment was never about speed, it was about accuracy. Joseph dreamed at 17, but it was not until he had been betrayed, imprisoned, forgotten, and refined that the dream became destiny. His vision was real, but his readiness had to be forged in suffering. And when the time came, he did not force it. He was called. At 40, you feel the same shift. You no longer knock on every door. You wait for the door that knows your name. You no longer strive to be seen. You prepare to be summoned. Because the vision is not just about what you will do. It is about who you have become. And that vision now leads you into the hidden power of stillness. You're no longer afraid of loneliness. There was a season when silence terrified you, when being alone felt like failure. You surrounded yourself with noise, with people with movement, just to avoid hearing your own spirit cry out in the stillness. But now something sacred has shifted. At 40, you do not flee the quiet, you enter it like a sanctuary, because you have come to know that loneliness is not absence, it is invitation. The world taught you that solitude is something to escape. That being alone means you are unwanted, overlooked, forgotten. But now you see the lie. You remember the prophets. Elijah alone on the mountain. John exiled on Patmos. Jesus withdrawing to the wilderness. Their solitude was not punishment. It was preparation for glory. There is a holiness in being hidden, a fire that only descends in private places. And at this stage in your life, you no longer seek the validation of crowds. You seek the voice that only comes in the cave, the still, small whisper, the one that does not compete for your attention but waits for your surrender. You no longer interpret silence as rejection. You receive it as intimacy. You no longer fill your days with noise to numb the ache. You let the ache teach you. Because now you understand solitude is where clarity sharpens, where discernment awakens, where presence becomes real. And what once felt like exile has now become encounter. You are not alone, you are being trusted. Trusted with quiet. Trusted with waiting. Trusted to carry what others cannot because you no longer need the world to fill what only God can. The ache has become an altar, and the altar has become your strength. From that stillness, something deeper begins to rise. The pain has become prophetic. There is a sacred threshold where suffering transforms into sight, where your wounds no longer whisper shame, but wisdom. At 40, you begin to see that your deepest pain was not a detour, but a doorway. Every betrayal, every failure, every silent cry you thought heaven ignored, none of it was wasted. The ache in your bones, the heaviness in your chest, the tears you hid from the world, they have become your language. A prophetic dialect born not from books, but from battle. You feel things others miss. You discern what others dismiss. Not because you are fragile, but because you have bled. Pain has made you sensitive not to offense, but to the spirit. You walk into rooms and sense what is not spoken. You hear what is not said. You carry a weight that is not yours because heaven trusts you to intercede. That is the burden of the called. To feel more, to see more, to suffer more. Paul said, "I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Jesus." That was not metaphor, it was memory. Memory etched into flesh. You too carry marks, not visible, but deeply spiritual. And every one of them points to something holy, a lesson learned, a stronghold broken, a calling refined. You begin to see that what nearly killed you is the very thing God is now using to give life to others. That what made you question your worth is now the oil flowing from your scars. You are not broken. You are anointed. You are not disqualified. You are dangerous to darkness, because your pain has made you real. And that reality is what makes your discernment sharp, your compassion deep, your prayers heavy. You have been through the fire and did not burn. You have walked through the flood and did not drown. Now you carry not just wisdom, but authority. And from that authority, your eyes are lifted to a higher rhythm, one that no longer worships time, one that trusts the timing of God. You've stopped idolizing time. There comes a sacred release when you stop measuring your life by the world's calendar. At 40, you no longer mourn the years that felt wasted. You no longer panic at the sight of someone else's timeline. You no longer compare your pace to the urgency of culture. Because now you know something they do not. The most sacred things in heaven are never rushed. The world says you are late. But God says you are right on time. The world worships youth. But heaven anoints maturity. You have stopped asking, why did it take so long? And instead you ask, what was God doing in the delay? Because delay is not distance. It is design. Abraham did not become a father of nations until his body was as good as dead. Moses was 40 when he left Egypt, 80 when he was sent back. Elizabeth was barren until the appointed moment came, and even Jesus waited until he was 30 to step into his purpose. All of them heard the same whisper in different ways. Wait, and now, so do you. But this time the wait no longer frustrates you. It refines you. Because you have stopped idolizing the clock. You no longer believe the lie that you missed your moment. You see clearly now. The moment was waiting for you. You are not behind, you are becoming. The years of silence were not punishment, they were proof of your depth. The time it took was not because you were weak. It was because what God was building in you required more foundation. You do not bloom on command. You rise when the soil is ready, when the rain has fallen, when the root is deep. And now the season has shifted. The atmosphere has changed. Your spirit can feel it. Because the time is not late. The time is ripe. And what is ripening is not only your calling, but your vision of who walks with you on this road. You finally see who was really for you. There is a clarity that only comes after years of walking through both celebration and silence. By 40, you've seen the hands that clapped for you when you were winning, and the backs that turned when you were wounded. You've lived long enough to know the difference between applause and allegiance, between those who love your light and those who can hold you in the dark. And now the veil has been torn. You no longer confuse proximity with loyalty. You no longer assume that laughter means love. You remember the ones who disappeared when the fire fell, the ones who turned away when your truth became inconvenient. And it no longer surprises you, because now you understand. God allowed the fading, not to leave you lonely, but to leave you clear. Even Jesus in his most anguished hour was abandoned by the crowd and even some of his own. Not because he failed, but because the cross is a place only covenant can follow. The same is true for you. The higher your calling, the narrower your circle. At 40, your discernment becomes sharp. You see through charm. You feel hidden agendas. You recognize who celebrates you in spirit and who tolerates you in silence. You no longer chase connections that must be forced. You no longer water dead soil hoping for fruit. You bless them, you release them, and you move on, and what remains is gold, fewer in number, fierce in loyalty. They do not need explanations. They do not flinch at your shadows. They carry your name in prayer, not in gossip. These are your people, not many, but enough. Because chosen ones were never made for the crowd, they were made for covenant. And in that covenant your steps become steady, because now you know you are not alone, you never were. You just had to walk through the separation to find the one sent by God. This is the moment the refining ends. This is the moment the revealing begins. There is something sacred about reaching the place where you no longer rush, no longer explain, no longer beg to be seen. There is a holiness in the quiet, knowing that you are not who the world thinks you are. You are who God has been forming in secret. And at 40, that formation begins to speak. It speaks not in volume but in weight, in the way your footsteps feel heavier with meaning, in the way your presence shifts a room, in the way your spirit starts to remember who it was before the world told you to forget. You are not beginning late, you are beginning right on time, divine time, the kind that does not follow the hands of a clock but the hands of a potter. And maybe the reason you feel such urgency now is because something ancient is waking in you, a purpose you carried long before you had words for it, a fire that would not burn when you were too young to hold it. But now you are ready, not because you are perfect, but because you are purified. The journey ahead is not about becoming someone new. It is about allowing who you have always been to rise, the chosen one, the misunderstood, the marked, the delayed but not denied. And if this stirred something in you, it is not by accident, it is by design. You are not alone in this. There are others walking the same invisible path. If this message found your spirit, let it speak back. Type your truth in the comments. Share your ache, your memory, your moment of awakening. If this felt like a mirror held to your soul, like this video, and subscribe to join others who are being called out of hiding. Because this is not just a video, it is a door. And once it opens, you cannot go back to sleep. You were never behind. You were becoming. And now, beloved, you are becoming visible. The journey continues, but you do not walk it as who you were. You walk it as who you truly are. Chosen, seen, sent,